Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Political Vigilante. My name is Graham Elwood. So there's an article here on truthdig.com about there's a group of anti-fracking activists up in Olympia, Washington, and they call themselves, I just had the title. Well, this is a dumb way to start a video, don't you think? They're called Olympia Stand. And what they're doing is they're blocking the Port of Olympia because they're shipping ceramic proppants, which is a fancy term for fracking sand, which is used in the fracking process. And they ship this from Olympia to the oil fields of North Dakota. And last year these protesters faced off with basically the port authorities, police, and they started gathering on November 17th. So I'm going to read you a couple of just sort of excerpts from this article. And this happened last Wednesday, I believe. So police blocked the streets in the area of 7th Avenue and Jefferson Street where the activists had set up a blockade, issuing verbal warnings before entering the camp. This is reported by the Olympian, which is the paper up there in Olympia, Washington. That police officials said the camp was empty when officers moved in, but that as public works crews began clearing the camp, 20 to 30 protesters tried to approach and were pushed back by the police. Oh, the camp was empty. Sure it was. This is what the Washington Post adds. This was contested turf. 2 sets of train tracks snaked north from the intersection to where the Port of Olympia sits on a piece of land, jutting into Bud Inlet like a fat thumb pointing from a fist. The encampment covered both rails, planting a makeshift site, and the people inside directly in the path of any engineers heading in or out of the port. That was the point in a peaceful protest spearheaded by members of local indigenous tribes. Activists planned to disrupt rail shipments related to the hydraulic fracturing business in North Dakota. A similar effort a year before ended in arrests and flashbangs and burning recycle bins. This year, the activists were sure authorities would react similarly. Isn't it interesting, though? We've talked about this a lot. That's how the Washington Post reports this stuff. This is what drives me nuts about the mainstream media. They just report this with this basically like, you know, here are the facts, this group and that group. They're not saying, they just say fracking is controversial. They can't just say fracking's bullshit, it's bad for the environment. Here's study after study after study after study. They can't do that because the Washington Post, partially owned, you know, by our good friend Jeff Bezos, who was paid $600 million by the CIA. So that's how the corporate media does it. They can say, we reported on it. They can't just flat out say, these are corporations that are jackbooting indigenous people who don't want contaminated water. That's not a fancy enough headline, I don't think, for the good people at the Washington Post. Maybe I'll use that. But we know for sure this video will get demonetized. So, I want to go in a little more, this is what drives me nuts. They just report it like it's a sporting event. Well, this team scored this many points, and this team got a penalty, and so they didn't score as many points. They're not, they think that's their bullshit rationalization to say, we're not biased. You're not biased against... So you don't want to take a stand on contaminated drinking water? Okay, great. Thanks, Washington Post. There's still people in Flint, Michigan who are suffering from neurological damage because there's still contaminated water in Flint, Michigan. But you don't want to... Okay, good. I'm going to quote some of the people that were in this organization. According to a blogger specializing in Olympia news, the group is collectively known as the Olympia Stand, as I said. It is demanding that the Port of Olympia cease all fossil fuel and military infrastructure shipments, as well as demanding horizontal and democratic control of the Port of Olympia, including participation from area indigenous tribes, according to the press release. The release states, Olympia Stand and other participants believe climate change can be stopped by engaging in nonviolent direct action and civil disobedience against fossil fuel infrastructure, from train blockades and port shutdowns to occupations of pipeline construction sites. Policymakers can continue to take no action on this issue and doom future generations to an uninhabitable planet, or they can follow the lead of the people around the world fighting for a just transition away from fossil fuels and extractive economies. Meanwhile, we will continue to fight whether they like it or not. It's interesting how they phrase that, because it's sort of some of the stuff that Chris Hedges talked about in Death of the Liberal Class, of we need non-violent resistance. Because he's been involved in a lot of civil wars, and so anyone out there who's like, we got to have an armed resistance, I'm not an advocate for that at all, because civil wars are gnarly, and those that get power will abuse it. Even those that started out as the like, yay for the resistance and the people, war's awful. It's the worst thing. It doesn't benefit anybody. Kyle Taylor Lucas, an Indigenous rights activist involved in the protest, told the Washington Post that this year's protest felt different from last year and included many young protesters of varying political ideologies, but that the rights of the Indigenous are a shared value. So last year, Lucas, they set up a camp and to protest at the same location to protest the Dakota Access Pipeline. You remember the Dakota Access Pipeline? The largely white population of Bismarck, North Dakota said, we don't want this pipeline coming near us. And, oh, it didn't. They listened to that community. And then when they wanted to put it across the Standing Rock Indian Reservation, sorry, too bad. And they used TigerSwan. TigerSwan is the private security company that was used in Iraq. And TigerSwan used anti-terrorist tactics. They treated the water protectors, the water protesters, like terrorists. TigerSwan did this. You might also know TigerSwan they have now been employed in the same pipeline that is being proposed to go across Pennsylvania. They're going to use the same tactics. So anyone that wants clean, drinkable water for them and their family is being treated like ISIS. That seems fair, right? For sure. It's the same thing. It's totally the same thing. Filthy hippies wanting drinkable water. God, what is their problem? Why don't they just like contaminated, good oil corporate water? It's good for everybody. It's good for the economy, having a population that's largely sick from contaminated water. So last year, here's what the port officials did last year. They arranged a meeting with the activists, but 12 hours before it was scheduled to occur, police raided the camp to allow a train to pass through and arrested 12 protesters. The Olympia police chief, Ronnie Roberts, quickly rebuked the port officials for failing to come to terms with the activists and even called on the port to stop shipping proppants altogether. Quote, this is what the Olympia police chief said. I'll give this guy credit. I don't want my department to be the scapegoat for the decisions the port is making, he said to the city council. I have spent the last 5 years empowering our department to build trust and build relationship with our community. I don't want to lose those efforts. It angers me to have to put our efforts in our officers in combat gear and face off with members in our community over something I don't believe in myself. What? Whoa, Officer Roberts, you're supposed to be the Pinkertons for the oil companies. You're just supposed to go nightstick and jackboot people because the oil companies are paying you to do so. How dare you speak in those terms? Community policing. What? That sounds ridiculous. So that's what happened. The people got pulled off the tracks, and this is what the headline in the Olympia paper said. The tracks are clear, but there's no resolution to Olympia's fracking-related problem. I applaud these people for resisting in this manner, and here's the crazy thing. You got to go to truthdig.com to find this story. I mean, the Olympian covered it. That's good. Maybe the local TV covered it. I didn't see anything about this on CNN or MSNBC at all. I didn't watch the ABC didn't cover it. Maybe it was. I didn't see it. Why didn't they? Because this is the oil machine, right? They buy ad time on all the major networks. And it's like when they first started protesting the Dakota Access Pipeline, and Obama said, well, let's see how this plays out. Despite the fact that there were police officers on Army Corps land, that's federal land, so the president, I'm pretty sure, has some jurisdiction over anything federal, if I understand my high school civics correctly, could have said enough. He could have done that when it first started in the summer, and he said, let's see it play out. And then, of course, he just did it in December after Hillary had already lost, and he knew Trump was going to overturn him 5 weeks later. So I've been talking a lot about fracking. You guys have sent me a lot of articles about it because it's so important. Fracking also increases earthquakes. There are explosions that have happened in Colorado, as I've talked about. And we just had 5,000 barrels of oil leak in South Dakota from the Keystone pipeline. So this is something, I've always say this, contact your local representatives, but also when it's time to vote, anybody, any sitting politician of any party that has backed or gotten any money from the oil industry, vote them out, get them out of there, because this is ridiculous. And as I've talked about, the pipelines are part of the carbon bubbles kind of last ditch effort. So this is so well this Olympia Stand's statement of how they can fighting for a just transition away from fossil fuels. I've talked. It's so funny. It's not just like protesters. I've said before, the governor of the Bank of England 2 years ago gave a speech and said, "Hey man, if we don't do anything and this fossil fuel bubble bursts, it's going to crush the entire planet's economy. We need to slowly deflate this bubble and slowly transition." But the fossil fuel industry has just doubled down. That's why they put all their money into getting Trump into office. That's why his whole cabinet is climate change deniers. And that's why they're trying to deregulate everything. And of course, Trump was allowed to deregulate things because Obama, Bush, and Clinton, and the first Bush all have slowly deregulated stuff to where by the time Trump got in there, it was easy for him to just keep deregulating. Obama did a little environmental policy stuff that was kind of good, but a lot of it was just sort of Band-Aid, not real environmental policy, not really transitioning us into a green economy. China spends us 3-to-1 in terms of wind and solar panel production. China has now become the leader in wind and solar panel production and sales. We could be doing that. We could put America to work making these things. Instead, we're building pipelines. And, no one's going to protest a wind turbine factory. No one's going to, these corporations, if they just they're not going to have to do this. There's no, don't you want, do they not understand humans need breathable air and drinkable water? I know it sounds like ridiculous that I even have to say that out loud, but they just, chasing the dollar, it's unbelievable. So hats off to Olympia Stand. I'm sorry you lost this battle, and we have to resist this in any way possible. Any sort of nonviolent resistance, we got to do it because they don't care that our water is getting contaminated. They know, they figured in, they know their pipelines are going to leak. So thanks for watching the show, you guys. Go to the Patreon to support it so I can cover more stories like this that are most assuredly going to get demonetized by our good friends at Google. And December 17th, I'm emceeing and directing and producing that live stand-up show for FNX, a Native American stand-up show. The details are in the show notes at grahamelwood.com. It's December 17th at 7 p.m. out at San Bernardino Valley College in the auditorium there on the campus. So, thanks for watching.